Chapter 11. A Childish Request. It was a lovely day in the dukedom. Every member of the Damothe household was outside, enjoying both the sun and the fresh air. Even the Duke, for whom today was the first real break he'd taken in at least 2 years, could be found playing a board game with his son Tyr. They were sat close to the main doors of the residency, tucked slightly to one side so they weren't in anybody's way. And why shouldn't the Duke relax? Elves were still crossing the border, but they had long since stopped raiding the villages for slaves. It seemed the elves were losing more slavers than they were gaining slaves. Now the elves that were still crossing the border started to act more like bandits than enemy soldiers, staking out the main roads of the dukedom and attacking travellers they felt confident enough to beat. The game they were playing didn't look a million miles different from chess. It went by the name of Battle, and consisted of a 7x7 board, complete with pawns, rooks, bishops, and a king. But other than the king, the pieces were known by different names. Rooks were called knights, and bishops were called archers, and had the ability to jump, shoot, over pawns, or peasants, as they were called. And there were no knight or queen equivalents. Instead, there were 2 pieces called advisors, sometimes mage advisors. These could move to any square they wanted. However, they couldn't attack or take pieces. Their only real purpose was to protect the king. The Duke started by moving his centremost peasant forward 1 square. Tyr echoed the move. This game had no 2-square opening moves for the pawn analogues, though perhaps in a strange turn of fate they still took pieces in exactly the same way. It might be worth noting at this time that any pawn did make it all the way to the far side of the board. It became what was known as a champion. It was no longer restricted to just 1 move, but could move 1 or 2 squares in any direction, including diagonal, so long as it kept to a straight line. The Duke advanced the peasant a square further. That was about as far as his game had gotten when Mangloss came and stood by the table. Mangloss was dressed in the robes of his station, a thick, intricately engraved ironclad staff held in his left hand. A mage carried the staff to help him focus his power, although Mangloss was getting to be so old that he often used it as a walking stick. "Sorry to disturb your game, my grace," the mage said, "but neither of you happen to have seen Sir Shearman around recently, have you?" "Not today," the Duke responded without looking up. "Why are you looking for him?" Mangloss looked about himself furtively. "It's not something I can discuss out in the open. Could we retire to your study for a couple of minutes?" The Duke looked longingly to the game board. Tyr had already made his second move, advancing his peasant just left of centre, 1 space. "I would trust Tyr with my life." "Tyr isn't the issue here, your grace. We must always be careful of what we say in public. You never know who else might be listening. Not every elven spy has pointed ears, you know." "It's seriously that important?" the Duke asked. "Just go, Dad," Tyr urged. "I'll wait." The Duke sighed. "First chance I've had fun in I don't know how long." He climbed out of his chair and led the way to the front doors of the castle residency, muttering under his breath, "This had better be important." Once in the study, the Duke moved to his chair behind a large oak table. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that one of the volumes in the bookcase seemed to have been put in the wrong position. "So what is all this about?" Mangloss closed the door gently behind him, and then rested his head against the door. He muttered something briefly in an archaic language. "What is that?" the Duke asked. "I'm just putting a wall on the door," Mangloss said. "It's a protective spell against eavesdroppers. You never know who might be listening in." "You really think it's that important?" the Duke asked. "Important and private," Mangloss explained. He approached the Duke's desk, and from a pouch that rested at his waist, he took 3 talismans that he then placed one after the other on the desk. "Very private." "I see," the Duke said. "I suppose you'd better sit down." Mangloss did as he was bid, lifting his robes up a little to give him room to bend his knees. Once he was seated, he rested his staff lightly against the desk and placed both his hands on his lap. He looked a little uncomfortable. "What are these?" the Duke asked. He indicated the talismans. "I made those for Sir Shearman," Mangloss explained. assuming he need say no more. I see, the Duke acknowledged with an understanding nod. Anyway, Mangloss expressed, I can't find him anywhere. Since I thought he might be out on a mission and it might be a waste of time to search for him, I thought I'd give you the talismans instead. Besides, you're more likely to see him again before I do. Of course, the Duke replied happily. I'd be delighted. I can see why you wanted to keep this thing quiet. Thank you, Your Grace, Mangloss said, rising from his chair. I'll get back to my hut and let you return to your game. Before you go, the Duke said as he stood up, how is my son doing in his magic lessons? Well, Mangloss stated, he's only 4 years old, and though he seems to have the learning capacity of, say, a 9-year-old human, there is still a limit to how quickly he seems to be able to learn new things. I've already taught him a wide array of very simple spells, but he's having trouble with some of the more complicated ones. It may be the reason why harpies don't tend to use magic. Found it too hard going. I'll keep on pushing him though. I'd like to teach him some healing spells at the very least. I guess I can expect no more. You've worked wonders with that boy as it is, the Duke commented. He moved around the desk and headed towards the bookcase. Before returning to his game, he wanted to find out which book it was that was out of place. What about my daughter? She seems to be a natural. Her main problem is that since she turned 14, her thoughts have been drifting away from magic altogether. Given time, she could be a mage to rival the king's best, but she needs to pay attention at her lessons. Oh? The Duke asked. He felt proud of his daughter's abilities, but lately he had also noticed that Jenny seemed to be a lot more adversarial. What's wrong? Well, Mangloss edged, it's not really my place to say. But you think you know? The Duke pressed. I think it's simply her age. She's at that time of life where she always seems to want to question figures of authority. It doesn't help that she's of noble blood, and I'm not. Maybe you can have a word with her about how important it is for her to concentrate on what she's doing, Mangloss suggested. I can't, the Duke replied. Officially, I don't even know that she's taken these lessons, nor can I take the risk of letting myself know. Being of noble blood, the learning of magic is supposed to be beneath her. I would be forced to disapprove. I might even have to insist she stop. I can only get away with allowing Reyes to learn because he's adopted. As you know, according to Flora, a commoner, even one adopted by a noble family, is still considered of common blood. Only royal dispensation can look past that and actually give him a real rank. A Nida has a better chance of ever becoming Duke. I see, Mangloss said. Well, okay, Your Grace, I'll continue to do what I can. I'm very much afraid that neither of your children is ever likely to become really powerful, though. Jenny definitely has the ability, but she doesn't seem to have the desire. Maybe it's for the best. The Duke turned his attention fully to the bookcase for a moment, and he quickly found the misaligned book. It was the one on the subject of harpies. Someone had been in a hurry to put it back, and had returned it to the wrong spot. The book was looking tired now. The pages, a lot more tattered than they had been just a few short years ago. Indeed, the book looked a lot more used than any of the other books that lined the shelves, even those that were of the same age or older. I think my son has been doing some studying in his spare time, the Duke commented with a slight smirk. There was no reply. I said, I think my son has been... The Duke turned round to see that he was now alone in the study. Mangloss had gone. Since he hadn't heard the door of the study, the Duke couldn't help but wonder how the mage had departed. He hoped Mangloss had remembered to take the ward off the door. He would hate to be stuck in here until the spell ran out, and besides, Tyr was waiting for him back in the courtyard. The Duke turned his attention back to the book for a moment. Out of curiosity, he decided to open the book to a random page. It opened straight to page 19, and the painting of the harpy with the strategically placed galls. I think I know what my son has been studying, he muttered to himself with a grin. He then put the book back on the shelf, in its correct place. For a moment, the Duke felt as if he should be chastising his son for looking at the harpy equivalent of a dirty picture. But this was exactly the sort of thing Mangloss had warned him about all those years ago. Reyes was at that age now where he should be learning all about the opposite sex. Here he was, sneaking glances at the picture in the book because he obviously felt that his fascination with the female harpy form was wrong. Things could only get worse for his son as he continued to get older. Reyes would see the girls in the courtyard on a daily basis, some of whom would almost certainly show an interest in him, and he would feel there was something wrong with him because he couldn't return that interest. Well, he couldn't sit there worrying about his son all day. He had to get back to the game. He picked up the talismans off his desk and opened one of the desk's drawers. Then he seemed to think better of leaving them unattended in his study, so he tucked them into one of the pockets of his jacket instead. Then, as the Duke checked everything was secure, he began to head for the door. Before he reached it, though, there came a loud knock. The Duke closed his eyes. So much for getting back to the game. The Duke sighed and returned to the chair on the far side of the large oak desk before calling, "Come in," to those beyond. At least it was evident that Mangloss had removed the Morden spell before he left. This time it was Jenny and Reyes who entered the study. Jenny had matured a lot in the last 2 years. No longer did she wear her hair in pigtails, but instead had chosen to copy one of the more fashionable hairstyles worn by the women of the castle. Her taste in clothes had also matured, and today she was wearing a beautiful long dress that draped along the ground when she walked. It was good to see that she had finally grown out of dressing up as one of the castle's servants. Although he was only 4, Reyes had the look of a 9 or 10-year-old. He was dressed in less regal clothing because he had been spending the morning practicing with a bow. He had brought the remains of the last bow he had tried to use into the study with him. It had snapped just above the grip. "We were just coming over to talk to you when we saw you leave with Mangloss. We thought it best to wait outside your study until you were finished," Reyes explained. Jenny glanced at Reyes and nodded her agreement, but said nothing. It was rare for the Duke to see more than one person at a time in the study, so there was only one guest chair. Only one of his 2 young guests would be able to sit down. "You should have the seat, sis," Reyes said. "No, you have it," Jenny retorted. "I think you should have it," Reyes insisted. "Please, ladies first." "Your legs are weaker than mine," Jenny riposted. "Jenny," the Duke interrupted sharply, "Reyes is trying to be gallant. We should always reward such behaviour. Please, do as he asks." Jenny looked hurt for a moment. She gave her father a challenging look before saying, "Okay, father," and sitting down. It was the same chair she used to sit in when the Duke had given her private lessons. It was more her size now, and her feet rested gently on the floor, while her back was properly supported. The Duke decided to turn his attention to Reyes first. "I see you've been doing a little bit of extra studying in your spare time." "Father?" Reyes was surprised by the comment. "I found the book you misfiled," the Duke revealed. I, Reyes tried to explain. "Harpies, eh?" the Duke said with a smirk. Evidently sensing that his father wasn't angry with him, Reyes found the words. "I guess I'm just very interested in them, father. I don't know why. I'm fascinated by them. I love the way they look. I even dream about them sometimes. I've even dreamt that I was flying with them." "You know," Jenny commented, "your dreams aren't that surprising when you consider—" "Jenny!" the Duke veritably yelled. "What?" Jenny replied obstinately. The Duke looked at her sternly. "I was only going to say—" Jenny started. "Don't!" the Duke warned. Jenny shrugged and sighed. "What were you going to say?" Reyes asked. Jenny looked around at her brother with a warm smile and said, "Apparently I can't tell you." "Please," Reyes pressed. He gave her his best doe-eyed expression. "No," the Duke insisted. "Now I'm a very busy man. What did you want to see me about?" "Well," Jenny said, "Anita and I were just talking in the courtyard, and she happened to let slip that the circus is back in the dukedom. It's currently set up just outside of Lamington." "Where, exactly, just outside of Lamington?" the Duke asked. "To the south," Jenny admitted. "Anyway, Anita and her father are leaving tomorrow to go and visit it. They plan to stay until evening, and then spend the night at a local inn before returning home sometime the following morning. She suggested that I might like to come along." "And you told Reyes, I assume," the Duke added. In a way, it made him glad to know that Reyes had at least one loyal friend in the family. Neither Tyr nor Greyforth seemed to spend much time with him, although Greyforth no longer seemed to hate him in quite the same way as he had back when Reyes was just a little baby. At least, Greyforth had stopped suggesting that they kill the boy. Indeed, Greyforth had even given him her present on his second birthday, a captured harpy shortbow from the very village Reyes had been born in. Perhaps Greyforth had thought it would be an ironic present, but whatever Greyforth's motives, Reyes certainly seemed to have appreciated it. Jenny, on the other hand, always had time for the little harpy, and the Duke would often see them together. Reyes was training nearby. He heard our conversation, Jenny said matter-of-factly. You know what good hearing he has. How is the training going? The Duke asked, trying to change the subject. Very well, Jenny replied. He's an excellent shot. Sir Grant does have two complaints, though. Firstly, the arrows he shoots into the target are very difficult to remove. And secondly, I seem to get through a lot of bows, Reyes admitted. I guess I'm just too rough on them. I tried to be gentle, but they break so easily. Don't be silly, Jenny told him. They're still giving you children's bows when they should have moved you to an adult bow by now. I'm too small to fire an adult bow, Reyes admitted. He looked down at the floor of the study as if ashamed. Maybe I should tell Sir Grant to get you an adult short bow then, instead of a children's longbow. Reyes looked up hopefully. How about it, Father? Jenny said suddenly. She was almost fluttering her eyelashes at him as she asked, Can we go to the circus with my best friend and your most capable knight? I ought to say no, the Duke said sternly. Even with the slavers gone, the roads are still dangerous. Also, they'll have mages. Those who can't get work at the court of a noble will often end up in a circus. It wouldn't be safe for Reyes to go. Oh? Reyes said, looking despondent. So I get to miss out again? Why are mages so much of a threat to me? You yourself have me learning magic with Mangloss, and he's a mage. You don't seem to be scared of me mixing with him. Well, no, the Duke replied. He's our mage. I know him. He's safe. Perhaps, Reyes replied. You've never really told me what it is you're afraid might happen. Think I might get kidnapped and forced to join a witch's coven? Think I might get cursed? Or turned into a toad? A spark seemed to come into his eye as he continued. Or maybe even a harpy? Almost before he realised it, the Duke was saying, That last I fear most of all. I'll look after him, Dad, Jenny said urgently. You know I will. You can't be everywhere, Jenny, the Duke said. Dad, Jenny trilled. Even now, as obstinate as Jenny could be, he found it hard to refuse his daughter anything. Well, Sir Grant is my best. Tell me, is it just him and his daughter, or will he be taking some men to protect you on the road? I don't know, Jenny replied. The Duke sighed. Very well, you may go. You must stay with your brother at all times and make sure nothing happens to him. Of course, Father, Jenny replied. Then I shall arrange a full bodyguard for the four of you, if Sir Grant hasn't already done so. I'd suggest you carry a sword with you, Jenny. Then turning to Reyes, the Duke said, You should also carry a sword. It might be nice for you to have a bow as well. I'd suggest an adult short bow, as we discussed. There's always that harpy short bow, Jenny suggested. Seems a strange gift, really, Reyes commented, but I guess he knew even back then that I was fascinated by harpies. Actually, that would be ideal, the Duke agreed. They make their bows strong and very flexible because of their extreme upper body strength. Reyes would have a fine old time trying to destroy that one. I still have it, Father, Reyes confirmed. I have it hung up on the wall in my room. Reyes still lived in the same part of the nursery as he always had, except that now he had personalised it as his own. I don't have any arrows for it, though. Normal arrows should work with it, Jenny said. Harpies use light, hollow arrows with very nasty barbed heads, but I don't think you'll have any trouble using arrows with normal shafts. I'd suggest you take the opportunity to get in some practice with it before you leave tomorrow, the Duke recommended. Jenny jumped out of the chair and said, Thanks, Dad. Then to Reyes she said, Come on, let's go and tell Anita and Sir Grant the good news. Do I have time to get the bow from my room? Reyes asked. Sure, Jenny replied. I'll come with you. You'll need it if you're going to practice with it anyway.